I'm going to guess this was about 8 or 9 years ago or so, and we're always really, really grateful when we open a brand new restaurant or when a brand new chef begins at one of our existing restaurants. And we're really, really grateful when people actually want to come see what we're doing. Especially grateful if within, say, the first day or so, one of those people is a restaurant critic. Because we're all very, very ready to, we know that just like a wine that's been put in the cask, it's never going to taste any better than this, is it? Right? So, sure enough, one of the people who took a really wonderful early interest in Gramercy Tavern, I think it was actually about 2 days after Tom Colicchio had left and Mike Anthony was just getting suited up to see if the chef's whites would work in our very dark kitchen with all those knives and everything. And lo and behold, and by the way, I do want to say, this is true, I am not a restaurateur who thinks he is a bad writer. This is one of the best writers you will ever see. I just don't always love what it is he's writing. But no, that man knows what to do with the word, all right. So the review comes out, and the entire review is based on a menu that was not Mike Anthony's menu. Because one of the things I insist on as a restaurateur is that while it's fresh in people's minds that there's a new chef around, maybe give the chef, this is what I want to do, give the chef a month or two to kind of understand the rhythms of the restaurant and what the guests like to eat and which cooks can cook as well as the chef wants them to cook, without having to go through the process of changing the entire menu overnight. So the review comes out, and it was maybe not as scathing as the one you wrote about New Orleans, but kind of close to that. And unfortunately, the review was based on Tom Colicchio's former menu and not the menu that Mike would put in place. So I knew that being right was irrelevant right here, because Alan Richman or any critic, because that's their job. Our job is to produce. A critic's job is to criticize. My kids taught me that a long time ago. Dad, after I saw some review from the New York Times many years ago, there's a reason they're not called restaurant praisers, But he had absolutely every right to critique that meal, and I took about a minute or two feeling really, really bad for Mike Anthony, because here he is, and if it's your first week and you're stepping into an institution like Gramercy Tavern with big shoes left by Tom Colicchio, that's a really tough thing to then just get slammed for a menu that's not even your menu. But it didn't matter if that was right or that was wrong. And if I'm not mistaken, I wrote Alan a note after that, and you know what, Alan, you may think that it's wrong to turn the other cheek, but I actually thought that the right thing to do was to turn the other cheek, give you the benefit of the doubt, and here's what's happened. This was really cool. 4 months after this, my wife Audrey and I are invited to an anniversary party of some really good friends. And my wife's best friend, who we're seated next to, has a date with Alan Richman that night. The right thing for me to do was to turn the other cheek and not talk about who was right and who was wrong. That is the irrelevancy of being right. Well written, but wait till you try Mike Anthony's food now. It's really good. Okay. Here's another story. Probably the first time in my entire career I learned about the irrelevancy of being right. This goes back a long ways, almost 30 years, because Union Square Cafe will be 30 years old this October 21st. About 3 months into Union Square Cafe's existence, when I started to just really understand how much fun it was to sell wine to people, especially this new breed of people that I had never really encountered before, called investment bankers. I didn't even know what they did. I really had no idea, except one thing I knew is that every time we had an investment banker in the house, they bought the most expensive wine on the list. So I would start to salivate whenever I heard there was an investment banker in. And back then, a really expensive bottle of wine at Union Square Cafe was $35, $40. And as a matter of fact, we were selling Sancerre for 12 bucks a bottle. We were selling Beaujolais for 14 bucks a bottle. How frustrating is it that you can't get a decent Beaujolais for under $80 these days? It's ridiculous, but we'll leave that for another occasion. So this group of investment bankers comes into the restaurant. There's 8 of them, biggest table we had. And the guy who had now been there for 4 visits, so that qualified as a regular 3 months into the restaurant, knew his name and everything, was clearly trying to impress his table. And he asked me to bring over our best Chardonnay. This was going to be good because we had just gotten in a Premier Cru Merceau, which was on the list for $45. Imagine that, $45. Maybe by the half glass these days. And so I proudly brought that to the table. You know, we're going to make a lot of money tonight. And he looks at me and he says, "That's not a Chardonnay." And I said, "It is a Chardonnay." And at this point, he goes, "It's not a Chardonnay." And then he looks at all the people at the table, and they're all nodding with him and everything, and I feel about that big and everything. And I've got my grandfather in my ear saying the customer's always right. And I've got my wine teacher from l'Académie du Vin in this year saying, "Of course it's a Chardonnay. There's only one white Burgundy that's not a Chardonnay made by Ponceau." Is that right, you master sommeliers here? Is that right? Anyway, we'll talk about that another time as well. But this was a Chardonnay. And this goes back and forth about 3 times. And finally, I go, I know what I'm going to do. I just leave the table, and I go back and I get the Sonoma-Cutrer Les Pierres, $35 instead of $45, bring it to him at the table, and he goes, "Now that's a Chardonnay." The most important lesson I think I've learned in my entire professional career happened right then, 3 months into being in business, in terms of the irrelevancy of being right. I wasn't right, he wasn't right, he was wrong, I was wrong. It didn't matter. No one's ever right. No one's always right, that's for sure. The only thing that was truly relevant is he needed to feel heard. And what I needed to have done at that very moment, which I trust I've done in every situation that's ever come up since that point in time, was simply to say, when he said, "This is not a Chardonnay," is to forget what's right and what's wrong, and simply to say, "Sounds like you'd like a California Chardonnay." And he would have said, "Thank you." And so the whole point is that we waste so much energy, so much effort on being right. Earlier you heard Will was talking about the notion of how often sometimes convenience and sometimes laziness gets in the way of the generosity of spirit that sometimes is shielded by the shield I call being right. Being right can be used as the most dangerous shield in the world of hospitality, and I would say of life. Think about life in general. Think about religion. How many wars have been fought in the name of religion? You name one religion that doesn't believe that its way is the right way. If that religion is the right way, or that one is the right way, or that one is the right way, someone's wrong. So think about not only the irrelevancy of being right, but think about the danger of trying to be right. I remember many, many years ago at 11 Madison Park, we had a policy. Every restaurant has policies. We had policy every single restaurant I've ever worked at. And the policy at 11 Madison Park had to do with the number of bottles of wine you were able to bring in before we would say no more. So stiff corkage fee for bottle 1 and bottle 2. And at bottle number 3, take it home with you, because we're not going to open it at that point. Now, a restaurant has a policy because it's to prevent all hell from breaking loose, right? We had a similar policy years ago at Gramercy Tavern. We will never serve any tavern food in the dining room, never. We have that policy. And it's a really simple thing to take out that shield of being right and tell a guest, sorry, that's our policy. We don't do that. And guess what happens when you take out that shield? The guest winds up and hits you so hard that your policy ends up costing the chaos it was trying to prevent. Now, I'm not up here to tell you not to have policies in your restaurants, because there's a good reason generically for every single one of them. But I would say that the best way to use a policy is to think of it more as a guideline and to use it as an opportunity to break that policy in the name of hospitality.